Greetings, everyone. It's Trey Jadlow. I'm here on this 26th day of June 2020. It's on a Friday afternoon, and I'm here with my new friend James, whom I met today or yesterday or something like that. Maybe the last few days that we've been on that thread there. And I presume he's an atheist. We're going to talk about the existence of God, and he's been very kind to come and have a discussion with me. And so welcome, James. I'm glad you're here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I think it was this morning, my time. So I don't know what that would have been. I think maybe late last night, your time.
Yeah.
A little bit last minute, but thank you for inviting me. It's always nice to meet new people and have a little chat about things and see what people think.
So would you mind telling me a little bit about yourself? I know you live in the UK, and maybe a little bit about anything interesting about your life, and maybe if you could give me your religious perspective, maybe how you were raised or something like that, just some background to where you are, and then I'll tell you about myself, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course, not a problem. I was raised in a difficult to describe, half Christian, half atheist sort of household. We didn't really think about it much until about when I was about 10 or 11. My father converted to Christianity and became a lay preacher. I went along to church with him a little bit, but never really bought into it, as it were. It was more of a kind of a convention or a cultural sort of Christianity. Sure. And then by the time I was 15, 16 and was allowed to not go, then I kind of just drifted off into other things. Then about 12 years ago, I guess, I started studying Christianity a bit more. There's a kind of a general interest in theology and broad sense philosophy. Bible study for about 10 years with various Christian groups weekly. With the honest sort of caveat that I was never a Christian. I just was interested in discussing it, and the people I was discussing it with were very nice and friendly, and I enjoyed going around and spending a couple of hours a week with them. Now I'm quite active on Facebook, running various discussion groups, particularly involving creationism. I help run quite a large group about Kent Hovind, things like that. So now I'm kind of taking more of an interest in evolution or creation, simply because I find that a great way to learn about those things, in particular science. A lot of what I know of science today has been learned through those discussions.
Okay. So what you mind telling me what denomination your dad was, or was he like non-denominational, or what?
Yeah, it was non-denominational free church. I kind of I used to joke they made it up as they went along, basically.
So was it kind of like a charismatic church then, kind of very organized?
Yeah, we don't really have that sort of thing in this country in terms of, but it was a free church, so they could put their own spin on it. It was quite a small town, and they were competing in quite a closed market for some fairly disinterested old people who were attending church in the town. So they tended to try and be quite liberal, and they were quite an open congregation, and quite open ideas, quite forward thinking, but quite kind of wishy-washy with it, if you see what I mean, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah. No. Yeah, that's helpful. Thanks. I appreciate that. Okay, so I'm a born again Christian. I've been a Christian over 30 years. I live in Kansas City, in the United States, right smack in the middle of the country. I'm a dental lab technician. I'm at work right now. I work by myself. I have my own business, very small, and I enjoy just kind of thinking about things of ultimacy. Issues of ultimacy are fascinating to me, of origins and meaning and morality, and why we're here, and what it's all about. Just fascinates me. And I generally, if I find something that I really am interested in, I'll laser focus on that. And if I'm not interested, you can't make me study it. So is that how you are?
Yeah, that's pretty much how I found I've got into the kind of theology and creationism thing.
Yeah.
It went from being a slight interest, and now it seems to take up far too much time. Um, you often get kind of certain Christians or certain creationists saying, "Well, we're living in your head. You wouldn't be spending all this time if you didn't really believe." And you think, "Well, maybe they're right." Yeah.
Well, it's just fascinating to talk about these things, and you get into these battles, and it's kind of like WWE or something, like wrestling or something. I always enjoy the banter. I'm much more subdued in real life than I am on there, though, because I'm always trying to get people to engage. I can't hardly get atheists anymore who will actually come on and talk. So I very much enjoy that. But anyway, I'm sadly divorced. I've been divorced about six years, I think, and I've got 6 kids, ages 20 or 30 down to 17, 3 boys and 3 girls. And so anyway, I enjoy. I very much enjoy the banter on online discussion as well. Probably sometimes get too much into it, but it's fun, and I really enjoy the idea of being able to interact with people with different ideas, and often with different cultures. I interact with a lot of people in the UK. I have some friends, several atheist friends I've had in the UK. I got one in Scotland, another one out of the Scilly Islands. And those two I've been friends with for over a decade, I think now. But anyway, it's nice to be able to connect with people all around the world. It's kind of cool with the internet, and it broadens your horizons, to be able to see how other people live and interact with them, and just learn from each other. So
yeah, culturally, the approach and the positioning of Christianity and atheism in America as opposed to here is huge. There's if you really want to kind of dig around and talk about Christianity and how and find a broad spectrum of views on it, you do have to kind of look, from my point of view, you do have to go to America for it, because things like creationism are very marginal here. Even mainstream Christianity is pretty small here in terms of the large population.
Mm-hmm.
It's a topic that most people here don't really talk about very much. So the internet and the ability to talk to people overseas is very useful.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think in America it's a lot more religiously inclined than the UK and Western Europe. They've gotten quite cold to that. And from my perspective, it's a loss of. In fact, I was just writing about this. I'm going to have a debate next Friday with an atheist, formal debate. We're going to be talking about the loss of metaphysics. From my perspective, it's the Enlightenment thought, particularly Immanuel Kant, that brought in the idea that you can't study anything that you can't touch. You're not allowed to. You just have to take it by faith. And so that's what's ushered us into this silly era where we have right now, where many times Christians don't understand what faith is. They think it's something like believing something is not true. Or are you familiar with many of the atheists in like the new atheist movement? I know Richard Dawkins, but do you know Peter Boghossian?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Peter wrote a book called A Manual for Creating Atheists, and he gave a couple of. Have you read it?
I haven't read it. I've read reviews of it, and I've read prose and text on it, but I haven't.
Okay. Well, it's an entertaining book, to say the least. But he has a couple of, I think it's chapter 2. He has a couple of definitions of faith, and they are utterly inane and stupid. But on our culture, even Christian culture, that's basically how it is defined. It's basically saying, knowing something you don't know, or pretending to know things that you don't know, and that's not.
How do you define that?
Well, faith has got to be, historically speaking. I'm a Reformed Baptist, so I tend to be rather historical, and I'm very much into being rational with my faith as well. I don't like the idea of pitting faith against reason, and so from a historical perspective, faith is always going to be defined basically with 3 different categories. You've got, in the Latin terms, are notitia, assensus, and fiducia. And notitia is you've got to have the information that's being proposed. There's got to be some propositional information. Say, for example, the example I always use is a chair. Okay, and if you say, somebody comes up to you and says, "This is a chair. It's for sitting." And so that's the notitia, that's the information. And I've got to be able to understand that. And I've got to look at it and look at that and think, okay, chair, sitting, got it. That's what it's for humans to sit in. I understand that. Then the second aspect is the sensus or agreement. And notation will also be knowledge. I just give you the English as well. So the knowledge, you got to have the propositional content and understand it. The second is the sensus or agreement. I've got to agree with that proposition. Okay, I agree that that's a chair. I agree that that could hold me up, and that would, fulfill the promise that chair is good for something for me, namely to hold my posterior. All right, and to sit in. So I got to know it. I got to agree. And finally, it's fiducia, which is trust. I've got to be able to, before my faith in that chair is full, I've got to be able to trust my posterior to it. I've got to actually go and sit down in it. And none of those elements are saying there's something that is irrational about it. Now, there is an element of trust there. That last element is trust. In other words, if you look in the Bible, and Abraham, is considered to be the father of faith because he believed God in Genesis 15, and it was credited or reckoned to him as righteousness. That was what he's considered to be the father of faith. So God made a promise to him, and he didn't realize it. He never fully realized it. He kind of partially realized it, the promises that God gave him, but he never fully received them. And he died not receiving them, but he trusted that God was going to provide those things that he said he was going to give. So it's not something that's irrational, but it may be something that we do not understand at the time what it is, but we're trusting in the promise, and having not yet received it. And in a sense, everybody exercises faith all the time. I always say this with atheists. They always want to make well, let me finish here. They always make this distinction and say whether you should have faith or not have faith. And he goes, atheists don't have faith. And I said, no, everybody has faith. The question is, do you have good faith or do you have bad faith? Because there's nothing that you have certainty about, James. Not one thing.
Yeah, I think, okay, so my definition of faith is very different. Let's see whether it's very different. I would point to something like, Hebrews 11, where it talks about faith.
The substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen.
But I would go that faith is an epistemological approach whereby you're reaching a conclusion or a belief in the absence of evidence. That would be my broad definition of faith. So in your example, if I was to see a chair, that's fine. I've no problem with that. But it's not faith. When I sit in that chair, it's not faith that makes me think that chair is going to hold me. Mm-hmm. It's reason. Mm-hmm. That's through experience. It's through having sat in other chairs. It's through looking at the chair and seeing what kind of state it's in. Has it got three wobbly legs and the back's falling off? Mm-hmm. No. Well, it's a sound looking chair. I can come to a reasoned conclusion that it would hold me. That's not a faith position. Can I be certain? No, but you don't have to have certainty. Faith doesn't tie into certainty. You can have a reasoned belief. Okay,
they're not the same thing, right?
No.
Certainty and faith are opposites. Would that be a fair thing to say?
Absolutely. Faith is a way of reaching a belief. You can reach a belief that you're certain about using faith, but you can't demonstrate that it's true or reliable. That's how I use that term faith.
Okay, and that's pretty much what is basically the canard that is purported for faith this day, and it's just not right. It's just not true. You're exercising faith in everything that when you put your foot on the gas pedal, you're exercising faith that there's going to be a consistency from the last time that you did that and the experience that you had, that it's going to have a continuity of the same thing. When you and go through the stoplight, you have faith that red always means go and green always means, I'm sorry, red always means stop.
Yeah, isn't that just conflating the faith with confidence?
I would say that both of those are faith. Confide means with faith. That's what the word means. Confident.
No, I think they are used quite differently.
But etymologically they're the same. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, but etymology doesn't mean anything. It doesn't tell us anything.
It doesn't. So
you can't.
Confidence doesn't.
Full well. I'm sure you're aware that there are plenty of words gymnasium comes from gym, meaning naked. Etymology doesn't tell us anything about the usage of that word.
It doesn't necessarily speak one-to-one necessity, but it does mean something. Would you agree with that? There is some correspondence to the use of gymnasium, to some correspondence to what we do today, although it may not be naked.
I don't know what gyms you go to, but I'm hoping it's not naked.
No, I'm saying etymology does matter, although it's not definitive. I think we need to come to an agreement. We're both not,
I can agree that etymology is it plays a role. It's useful.
Okay.
It's not definitive in telling us how we use a particular word or a particular idea. Okay. If you're defining faith as equating to kind of trust or confidence, and then you say, well, actually, you have faith that your wife isn't cheating on you, you have faith that your car will start, you have faith that the chair will hold you, then I have no argument with that. I have no problem if that's how you're defining faith.
Mm-hmm. So where's your problem?
I don't have an argument with that. That's not an issue.
No, I'm saying, what do you have a problem with religious faith?
But I don't use. But what I'm saying is, I don't use faith that way. Faith is used for me, and is a way of, when you don't have good reason to believe something, then you have to take it on faith, and faith is never reliable as a way to believe something.
Can you give me an example?
Sorry, go on.
Can you give me an example of faith that is bad faith?
I could say anything on faith. So I could literally give you any example and say, on faith, I believe that I will win the lottery tomorrow. I mean, there's no evidence for it.
But that's not biblical faith.
I believe that corresponds to Hebrews 11.
No, it doesn't. That's credulity. That's not biblical faith.
No.
Do you think that I can believe that I can have a Cadillac tomorrow? That's biblical faith, and I just wish it, and it happens?
I believe how most Christians would use faith in terms of when they are talking about their own faith. They're talking about faith as a belief that they have. It's evidence of itself, as in a belief in God that you have in faith.
Okay, well, that's a cult. It's called the Word of Faith movement, where they view faith itself as actually an entity itself. They said faith is a force. Words are containers of the force, and through the force of faith, you can create your own reality. That's a cult. That's not biblical faith at all. That's people who they've melded Eastern mysticism with Christianity and made a new kind of something or other. But that's not biblical faith. You can't create reality just by trusting in faith. And let me say this: faith is only as good as the thing in which you're placing your faith in. Okay, it's always object oriented. It's not an entity in and of itself. It's an instrument towards something. For example, the chair. Let's use this example of the chair. Your faith is only as good as the chair in which you're sitting. If you have faith in something that a chair, like you said, is a three-legged stool that only one is about to fall out, your faith is not good in that stool because the object in which you're placing it is not worthy.
Again, I don't have any major argument with that. I mean, like I say, if that's how you're defining faith,
I'm defining it historically from the Bible, not from what culture says. Yeah, that's what I want to do.
What I would say is, I'm a non-Christian. I don't, ascribe to the Bible. Obviously, I'm not here to dictate to you what the Bible says or what it, So if you're saying, well, this is how I interpret the Bible, this is how I, am reading what the Bible tells me about faith and what that means. I'm happy to go along with that definition, and I'm happy to say, yeah, I agree. Well, by that definition, certainly I have faith in lots of things. Okay. That's not an issue. That's because the only way I could argue with it would be to say, well, your definition of faith is wrong, and I'm not really here to do that. That would be a bit presumptuous of me.
Well, if you wanted to say that my view of faith was wrong, you would need to give evidence for that, and you're not necessarily prepared to do that, is what you're saying, and you don't want to assert something that you can't back up.
No, because you've quite clearly said that you're talking about biblical faith in terms of how you define faith as used in a biblical context. Mm-hmm. And no, I wouldn't particularly argue with you on that, because I wouldn't want to say, well, actually, you're wrong about the Bible that you believe in and that you interpret, and you have an understanding of. I mean, that's up to you to kind of come to your own conclusion about what that text says.
Yeah, but would you agree, though, that the facts that I am purporting are not personal predilection of myself, but they're objective realities?
Yeah, I'm not trying to say this is some sort of subjective one-man cult kind of idea.
Okay.
What I'm saying is that's up to you as a Christian to decide if that's your biblical interpretation of that idea.
Okay.
Within wider philosophy, faith is would you agree within wider philosophy, faith is pretty much considered an epistemology that's whereby you are reaching a conclusion in the absence of reason? I mean, I can bring up Stanford now. That's the wider philosophical usage of faith. Would you agree with that?
I wouldn't disagree that people will purport such. Yeah.
Yeah, and again, that doesn't mean you have to concede any major.
But that's true.
Any ground on that. All you'd be agreeing to is, well, yes, by that definition of faith, James, you don't have any faith.
And I would say that many Christians would have that sort of faith, and it's just wrong. That's just all I'm saying. It's a card.
And you would agree that is a bad epistemology. If you're using it in that sense, it's a bad epistemology.
It's dangerous. That's what airplanes in the building on 9/11 are about, or drinking Kool-Aid in Guyana. I mean, that's the kind of stuff you got to watch out for. It's dangerous.
Well, yeah. I mean, anytime you reach a belief in the absence of evidence or solid reasoning, that's never going to be a good idea. Clearly,
right.
That's, I would say, that's how wider philosophy uses that term. Mm-hmm. And by that definition, I don't have any faith. But certainly by how you're using it in that, what you say is the biblical definition, yeah, I have faith. That's fine. I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah, and so, and I don't have that faith that you're talking about either. That's in a wider, because I can't abandon my mind. Christianity is not a construct that is based irrationally. Okay. Now there are elements of mystery. Let me give you three categories. You've got contradiction, you've got paradox, and you've got mystery. Okay. And contradiction is where something is obviously, you're saying A is A and non-A at the same time in the same relationship. A lot of non-contradiction. That's, nobody questions that. Paradox is something where you don't understand it, but then when you go into deeper inquiry, you see, oh, that means I didn't understand that. And so it makes sense once you really dig into it. For example, Jesus said, whoever wants to save his life may lose it. And you're thinking, oh, well, that's contradictory, doesn't make any sense. But then you say, no, what he's talking about in different senses, and in order to save your life eternally, you've got to lose your life here towards your own desires and goals for God. So that would be a paradox where it appears to be contradictory, but it's really not. And then you've got issues of mystery, which is something that we don't have the capacity to understand. It's like teaching higher math to a horse. It's not possible. For example, God himself, as he is historically defined, and I think the Bible defines him as such, is simple. He doesn't move from one active state from potential state to an actual state. In other words, he does not change in his being. And so for us to be able to understand God must use accommodational language for us. It's called anthropomorphism or anthropopathism. He gives himself qualities of humanity so that we can understand. Like it says that God's parted the waters with the blast of his nostrils. It doesn't mean that God has a huge nose and he's blowing from heaven there, but it's anthropomorphic language or he hides us in the shadow of his hand. It's using words that help us to be able to understand, because we cannot understand a pure eternal being that does not change, because every time that we think by movement. We have to predicate, we have to change. Every logical sentence for us has a subject and a predicate. In other words, you've got the subject you're talking about, and you've got some accidental thing. You're speaking about that thing, which adds something to it. It synthesizes something else. God doesn't think synthetically, okay? He knows everything all at once at the same time. So we can't know things the way that God knows them. So there necessarily is entailed within that proposition of knowing God mystery. There's some things we cannot know, and there is language that doesn't exactly line up with them one-to-one, but it is true insofar as we can know it. And that's probably a little bit deeper in theology proper you're talking about, but I want to say that
listening to you go there, that's fine.
Okay, well, so I want to say that within language, I'm not saying there are not some things that we don't understand, but they're not going to be contradictory. And a lot of people view Christianity, even Christians sometimes, as somehow being glorious to embrace contradiction. And that's terrible. I know that even some quantum physicists, Niels Bohr, used to embrace contradiction, and some liberal theologians also, Karl Barth would talk about that, and Emil Brunner would say that contradiction is a hallmark of truth. Yeah. And once you go to that, I mean, in every discipline there are people like that. For me, it's like, because Einstein was like, no. He told Bohr, he said, no, I can't take contradiction. Sorry, I'm not going to go there. And they had and that's where I am, I don't want contradiction, but I will admit that there are paradoxes, some things we don't understand. And I'll also admit that there is necessarily mystery when you're dealing with God, because our minds cannot conceive the eternal, because we ourselves are temporal.
Right. So you think the kind of the perceived presence of these kind of paradoxes and things put people off? Do you think that's why people become atheist or are atheist, or it is?
Yes. I mean, we're living in an age right now of amazing technological advancement, but also an amazing level of stupidity, in my view, because atheism, and this is going to be my main, we're going to be arguing morality next Friday, but atheism cannot give an account for teleology, for purpose. If you're saying that, are you familiar with Aristotelian causality at all?
No, you'd have
the fourfold. All right, there's a fourfold causality of Aristotle, and I just talked to somebody about this last night. I kind of repeat myself a lot of things, but I know a few things. But the things that I know a few of, I know pretty well. I feel like I understand them because I try to own my ideas. But Aristotle had what's called a fourfold causality, and what he did is he broke causality up into 4 different categories and said that these 4 categories help us to understand why something happens. And what he had these categories of actuality and potentiality, and what he said is that he used the example of a sculptor and a sculpture, and you got a sculptor making a sculpture, and you've got these categories that bring about the statue. And so the first category he would talk about would be the block of granite. That would be the material cause. That is the matter out of which the thing was being made. Okay, and then you've got the formal cause, which would be the blueprint of the statue that the sculptor wants to make, whether it's in his head or on paper, whatever it is. It's the thing that guides him in a direction to make whatever it is. He's going to say, well, I'm going to make a bull or something, so he's going to make that. The final cause would be the reason for which the sculpture is made, and say he's commissioned by the king or something like that. That's the reason. That's the final cause. That's the end goal and why he is making it. And then you have the efficient cause, which the efficient cause is the sculptor himself. He's the one that's bringing about the end result of the statue itself. And then there's a subcategory that was brought in a little bit later, I think, it's called the instrumental cause. And those are the instruments that he uses under the efficient cause. Those are the instruments he uses to bring about the final result of the statue itself. And so when you're looking at causality, you've got to be careful that you're thinking about this. And when we had the Enlightenment and we had early modern physics, we saw repudiation of Aristotle's. Aristotle had a physics, a view of physics that he had, and it was terrible. It was wrong. And so here you had Isaac Newton come along with early modern physics, and he brought something much better. But the problem is they took Aristotle and they threw him out altogether. And they should have thrown out his physics, but they should not have thrown out his metaphysics, his causality. And so what they did is they did away with formal and final causality, and they just began to look at, okay, how does this bit of matter deal with this bit of matter? Everything was material. And we say, okay, how does matter work? And so when they looked at causality, they didn't really look at purpose or goal. If you ever study the evolutionary theory, they always say you're not allowed to ask about goal, because there are no goals. There's no formal cause. Everything is just natural selection, selecting characteristics as that which leads to survival. Okay, so what we've been since the Enlightenment have been not allowed to ask questions about purpose or goal or value or anything like that. And so not only was it the early modern physics that kind of threw that whole thing out of goal and purpose, but you have Immanuel Kant coming along and saying, basically, I'll give you a very short version. We'll just focus on Kant because it started with Descartes, then went to Hume, and went to Kant, Descartes, Hume, Kant. Kant comes along and basically said he's trying to make a new synthesis because Hume brought major skepticism through his empiricism. And Kant says, I've got to save the phenomena of science and of theology. And he came up and he tried to take some rationalism and some empiricism, and he kind of worked them together. And he basically said, if we can have any knowledge at all, because Hume basically said you can't have any knowledge. He said, if we could have knowledge at all, what would we need? And he said, most importantly, we've got to have sensory experience. And to have knowledge about something, we've got to be able to experience it. And he said, everything in this world we can experience with our senses, except for three things. And he said, these three things that we can't experience are the essence of things. When I look at something, for example, I look at a chair or something, I can see the accidental or the outward properties of this chair. And I can even take a microscope and I can look at it, and I can look at those materials and I can examine them, and I can even go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And I can even go to the atomic level, but then you get to the subatomic level, and we keep peeling away the onions, and we never actually see the essence of what something is. And so we're still led to agnosticism, even to this day. We don't know the essence of things. We can't experience them with our senses. And so he called it the Ding an sich, the thing in itself. He said, we don't know that. And he said, we also don't know the soul or the self. You can't go to the doctor and say, hey, doc, how's my soul doing? Can you tell me about my soul, my purpose? My person, who I am? And the doctor's going to say, no, I don't know anything about that. And then he said, thirdly, God. He said, God, you can't experience him with the senses. So he put those three things in what he called the noumenal realm. Everything else is the phenomenal realm. It's the realm of phenomena. We can experience it. It's stuff that happens. But he called the noumenal realm, which is like the spiritual realm or the air realm. He called that the realm that we cannot prove, and so therefore we just take it by faith. And that's where we see this dichotomy. You even mentioned a little bit earlier in our discussion, you talked about how, these things are the values or religion. And what he has is, I don't know if you're familiar with Francis Schaeffer. He was a famous Christian in the 20th century. Yeah. He would talk about having this separation between the upper story and the lower story. And basically he said, what we have in the lower story are facts. Those are the scientific facts. And basically it corresponds to Kant's phenomenal realm. And then he said, yeah, the upper story, which is going to be religion, values, and all that stuff, that's going to be the noumenal realm. And he said, and what you do is the way that people treat it today, and they've treated it for the last 250 years, essentially it's gotten more and more that way, that anything on the upper level, that's just personal. It's not a fact. It's not really true. It's just something that's yours personally. And that's because Kant told us basically metaphysics is off the table. Kant said, since God and these invisible things are in the noumenal realm, we just have to take them by faith. We're not allowed to inquire about them and think about them. So the last 250 years, we've been like people, like birds flying with one wing. We're not allowed to ask purpose or goal. And so that's why atheism has, I'm sorry, go ahead.
But do we not ask about them? I mean, I'm fairly sure.
Not with intellectual rigor, because what we do is just basically say, I mean, you know this, when you talk about religion, you'd say, well, that's what you believe. Okay, whatever, fine. But we don't think about natural theology very much. In other words, you have two types of theology in the Bible. You've got natural revelation and you've got special revelation. Natural revelation is how God is revealed to all mankind, and it's through creation and it's through conscience. Okay, Romans 1 and Romans 2.
Yeah, that's it. Okay, let me pause you there.
Sure.
Well, I would argue that actually we have discussed over the last 250 years, perhaps more rigorously than ever. We've discussed the soul, we've discussed God, we've discussed those questions more rigorously than ever. The fact is, we're not necessarily using science to do it, because science is off doing something else. But we have discussed it. It hasn't gone away. The amount of work, the amount of literature, the amount of books on philosophy, you only have to go on YouTube. It is full of debates of people discussing this. I don't think it's fair to say that, well, we don't cover that. We don't look at it seriously. I think we do.
No, I don't think we think. Certainly, people talk about it, but they don't talk about it on a mature level. Because let me finish real quick. Let me say something here. When Immanuel Kant came along, there was a shift. For the entire history of mankind, we've always focused on metaphysics or ontology or being. In other words, that which is outside of us. And what we are to do is we're to find out what that reality is, and we bow our knee to it. I'm not necessarily talking about God. I'm just talking about anything outside of us. The emphasis is on the outside and the reality, and it's not an emphasis on us. And our epistemology comes second. When we had Immanuel Kant and that whole revolution in the Enlightenment period, everything shifted because basically Descartes basically said you can't know anything outside of your own mind. Are you familiar with cogito ergo sum?
Yeah.
Okay, so basically, Descartes basically said all you can know for sure is what's in your mind, and that's Kant basically kind of used some of him in the synthesis. And so the shift went from outside of us to inside of us. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with philosophy today, but anybody that knows anything about philosophy today, it's useless because all it does is give skepticism. It never gives any answers. I'm talking about modern philosophy. The Roman Catholics never lost it. And so what we've got is, but it's because they emphasize on themselves. What can you know as a person? Not very much, because you're very limited and your senses are very weak. But if you focus on metaphysics and that which is outside of you, you can gain a lot more knowledge, because what's outside of you is greater than you are, because what's outside of you is what gave rise to you. You are not primary, but metaphysics is primary. The ontology is primary, not the epistemology. And this is the problem. This is why modern philosophy always focuses on epistemology, and it always leads to skepticism. And it's really useless. And there's a renaissance going on right now in philosophy, even among the naturalists. You're going to see a lot of my atheist friends have made a shift, even in the last 4 or 5 years, significantly toward philosophy, where it used to just be empirical science. And like Richard Dawkins is largely kind of an idiot about these things. He doesn't understand. I remember, you know who Ed Feser is? You ever heard of him?
Yeah, I've heard of him, but I couldn't.
Okay. He wrote a book called The Last Superstition. I recommend it. It's a great book. I haven't read the whole book, but what I've read, it's really good. He is a Catholic philosopher, and he's really sharp in a lot of these things. And he's basically poking fun at the new atheists. And he said, at the beginning of the book, he said, Richard Dawkins wouldn't know the difference between metaphysics and metamucil. And he just really pokes a lot of fun at him. But a lot of these guys, though, are really getting wise to this. And like I said, we're seeing a new renaissance, and it's very exciting. But we have been basically denuded of deep thinking on these things of metaphysics. And it doesn't give us any way to think about things like morality. Because let me ask you, as an atheist, is your moral code based upon the reality that existence matters?
Is it based upon existence matters?
On the premise that existence matters?
Yes, I would say so.
Of course it is. Does existence matter?
Yes, I would say so.
Objectively?
It depends how you mean existence matter.
I've never met an atheist that said that objectively existence matters. Because you've got to have something outside of yourself that's giving existence.
I'm trying to just make sure I'm clear on what you mean by does existence matter. Does my existence matter, and matter to who? Because that's
do we have a moral obligation to care for one another?
Atheism wouldn't say so. No, I mean that's not an atheist.
Are you an atheist?
Atheist doesn't tell you anything on that at all.
It can't even address it.
No, it doesn't at all. I think this is a major problem with when people talk about atheism. They expect atheism to correlate to things like Christianity.
No, I'm saying, can atheism provide an answer for the question? Because if it can't,
absolutely not. Atheism can't provide an answer to anything. It's that simple. Which is what I was saying. This is something that I see come up time and time again, whether it's talking about morality, whether it's talking about the origins of life, whether it's talking about the origins of the universe. Atheism does not provide an answer for any of those. Atheism is purely a lack of belief in God.
It's a negative worldview, right?
It's not a negative worldview.
It's half a worldview. Would you say that?
It's not a worldview at all. That's the absolute core
issue.
But
does it make a statement about the world?
It makes a singular statement. No, I wouldn't even say that. It doesn't make a statement about the world, or it's not an ontological statement. It's a statement of disbelief. That's it. It's not saying God does not exist.
Is it making a proposition about reality?
It's not a proposition.
So the proposition that there is no God is not a proposition about reality.
I reject the proposition there is a God. I reject that proposition.
And would that be fundamental to atheism?
Sorry?
Would that statement, I reject the proposition that there is a God, be fundamental to atheism? Think about the word.
Yeah, because that's the definition of
Okay, so is it making a statement about this realm in which we live called the universe?
It's making a statement about my belief about the realm.
Well, everything that we have is a belief. None of us has a pure knowledge.
Let me kind of got off track there. Let me explain what I mean again. So atheism doesn't provide a model of what matters and what doesn't matter. It doesn't provide a model of how the universe started. It doesn't provide a moral of morality and what we should or should not care about.
Well, it does provide a statement about how it started in a negative sense.
What if I'm an atheist? How do I believe the universe started?
That there's no necessary being to existence.
Right. But that doesn't tell me
that is a positive statement. There is no necessary being for all existence. All existence is dependent independently. That's what they have to say. It's ridiculous too.
Right. You are aware that there are Buddhists who are atheists, yeah?
There are what?
Buddhists. There are Buddhists who are atheists.
Oh, Buddhists?
Yeah.
Yeah. Buddhists don't really make a statement about God at all. They don't even address it.
No. So, but they would not believe anything I believe about where the universe came from. They have a very different model.
But would their model be coherent? That's my point. We got to test them all for coherence.
Now you're taking it off onto whether it's a good model or whether it's a true model, whether it's coherent.
Well, I can say the whole universe is built upon the back of a purple camel. So what? I mean, I'm not going to listen to somebody who says that unless they can give me a justification for it.
Oh, absolutely, I agree. You shouldn't necessarily. I'm not saying go out and be a Buddhist. If you're watching, don't be a Buddhist. But but the fact that they are atheist and I am atheist means that clearly there isn't some coherent belief or positive statement about where the universe came from because I'm an atheist.
Well, if a Buddhist calls himself an atheist, they're going to have the same view about you insofar as to saying there's no necessary being that from which all existence depends, or upon which all existence depends.
I'm happy to state my position, which my position would be that, yeah, there is no necessary being. Yeah. I can state my position on that. What I can't do, and what I never do, is speak for all of atheism, because I don't think that is a coherent group. It's not a single set.
So you think there are some atheists that believe in a God?
No. No. I believe that there are atheists who will have different views about where the universe came from.
Well, sure, but they're all going to be irrational. I've never met an atheist that could give me a rational.
Sorry, go on. Finish.
Well, go ahead. Why don't you give me your case? Demonstrate that I'm wrong, that you're irrational in believing in your cosmology or cosmogony.
What, in terms of where the universe came from? Mm-hmm. So what you're asking, what my belief is in terms of where the universe came from? I don't know where the universe started or had a start or any of those questions.
Okay.
I don't have a firm belief on that.
Okay. Well, I would assert to you that you cannot have a coherent view of that without assuming a necessary being, because you cannot have changing being existing independently by definition. Right.
But I can have I don't know without.
I don't know is not an answer. That's a concession that you don't know. I do know, and I'm saying to you, demonstrate me wrong, or else accept my view.
Well, tell me how you know. That's more important to me than what you say you know. It's okay. How you know.
Well, I use my sensory experiences and my rational faculties.
Right. So
those are my instruments. Will you grant that we have basic reliability of sense perception in our inquiry to this world? Basic, not perfect.
Yeah, within the obvious sort of.
Enough to know that I exist as the inquirer.
Yeah.
Okay. And then would you grant the laws of thought, the law of non-contradiction, most importantly?
Well, yeah, I have to, because that's the way the universe is.
Yeah. Okay. So if you grant me those two instrumental presuppositions, then it necessarily follows. Well, let me say this: if something exists, there are only four possibilities. Number one, it's an illusion. Number 2, it's self-created. Number 3, it's self-existent. We'll go through these. And number 4, it's created by something that is self-existent. There's only 4 possibilities. I've never heard anybody that could come up with any of the other ones. But number 1, that which exists is an illusion. Rene Descartes gave us the refutation of that, because if somebody is doubting, then at least I know the inquirer. The inquirer exists, because in order to doubt, you got to have a doubter. Okay. So I know that, and you might be an illusion in my mind. These cabinets behind me might be an illusion, but I know that I exist because I am inquiring. I can be an solipsist. That's fine. Okay. So we know that that something exists and not illusion. Number 2, that which exists is self-created. Now, again, you've granted the law of non-contradiction, and for something to create itself, it would need to be and not be at the same time in the same relationship. It would need to be existing before it creates itself in order to create itself, which is a patent falsehood. Okay, it's not possible. That would be a contradiction. All right, the third one is that which exists is self-existent. Now, that which is self-existent must not be subject to change, because every time something changes, it is acted upon by something outside of itself that moves that being, the one that's changed. It moves from its potential state to its actual state, and that which acts upon it must be in an actual state already in order to do that. So, for example, you go outside and you get sunburned. You are moved from being potentially sunburned to actually sunburned. You have changed states of being. Now, there's a continuity in your being that you're still James, but you have moved to a different state. Now you are sunburned, or whatever it is. So therefore, you were subject to whatever it was outside of you, it's the sun in this case, that brought you to that new state of being. Okay? You cannot have an eternal, a complete set. Let's put a Venn diagram. Let's say there's a set. Everything in the world, let's say it's changing. Everything in the universe is changing, which means it's dependent. You cannot have an entire set of dependent existence existing independently. It's not possible, because it's dependent by definition. That's the law of identity. Independent cannot be dependent by definition. Or I'm sorry, dependent cannot be independent by definition. So okay, if the universe is changing, there must be something, the fourth possibility, that is self-existent that created that which is dependent. You can't have dependent being existing independently. So there must be, therefore, a God. And that's what...
why God? Stop 1 second. Why God? Why does it have to be a God?
It has to be a self-existent being.
Why does it have to be a being?
Because the only other thing than being is non-being.
No.
That was Parmenides' argument in the pre-Socratic age. The only other thing than being is non-being.
Yeah, no. I'm sorry. I think you know what it meant.
No, I know.
It doesn't have to be a God.
It has to be a self-existent being. You don't like that word? Call it Marilyn Monroe. Whatever. It's the same thing.
Or it could be a law of nature.
No, a law of nature. It
could be an unknown process that we don't know.
Well, if you want to say it's an unknown process, where you're conceding the argument, whatever you call it, that process, it's self-existent. That would be God.
Oh, no, because you've just tacked that would be God onto it. I'm not conceding the argument. I'm saying it's possible that there's an unknown process.
Okay, let me say this. No, it can't be a process, because processes change. It has to be a being. It has to be an unchanging, simple being.
No, you're just leaping to God at the end. No, that's just not true. There could be an unknown process, an unknown scientific...
It's not a process. It can't. Processes change. Do you agree that there must be 2 types of being? There must be necessary being and contingent being. Since contingent being exists, are you familiar with the modus ponens argument?
Yeah.
So, in a conditional statement, if P, then Q. If P is granted, then Q necessarily follows. Okay. The P is contingent being. If there's contingent being, there must be necessary being. Otherwise, contingent being would not be, because it's dependent. Dependent existence cannot exist independently. It's an analytical truth, and I'm not giving you evidence. I'm giving you proof. If you exist, God exists, or a God exists. I'm not making necessarily the argument for Yahweh at this point.
No, it feels like you're leaping from something that's non-contingent and then saying that that's God, and I don't understand why.
All right, don't call it God. Call it the non-contingent one. Go with the Neoplatonists' perspective. The one. Call him the one.
I'm not going to call him something. There could be a non-contingent. Even if we say, okay, there's a non-contingent thing, the universe, the reality could be that non-contingency.
No, because we're talking about distinction in reality is made up of contingency. Would you agree with that? Of dependent being.
Say that again. Sorry.
Reality is made up of dependent being. In other words, you and me. You're not independent, right?
The things within reality, some things within reality are, contingency.
Yeah. So reality is, since there's change is real. There must be some part of reality that is dependent, but dependent existence cannot exist independently. Therefore, there must be a self-existent nature to this reality. And it's distinct from the contingent reality. Because I'm not self-existent.
No, you're not. I'm not. Mm-hmm. The fact that we're not doesn't mean the cosmos, the universe, isn't.
Okay, well, you're just calling God the cosmos.
That's fine.
But it's not a complex. It's not complex. Do you agree with that? The one being is not a composite of things. It's not many things together, because in order for something to come together to composite, it has to have an assembler, because it's not what it is until it's put together. So it's dependent. Anything that is composite is dependent by definition, because it had to be put together. Okay, so God has to be simple. The one has to be one. He has to be a perfect unity of being, and he cannot be composed of parts. Otherwise, he himself had to be put together by something outside of him, because he wasn't what he was until he was put together.
Right. Sorry, I'm just trying to follow that. I'm still not seeing how you're going from the universe or the cosmos or whatever we want to call it, reality, has been the non-contingent thing, and then coming to God and saying, well, the universe can't be non-contingent, but God can.
Okay, what you're trying to do, though, is you're trying to say that the conglomerate, this is what you know what Tom Jump is?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I debated him. He has a little bit of an inflated ego about his way to be able to argue, but he was saying I was committing the composition fallacy. In other words,
I kind of think you are, but go on. Sorry.
Well, that's basically what you're saying. Is you're saying we could take everything together, and together it could be self-existent. Is that what you're saying?
Self-existent. I'm saying that. I don't know whether I'm saying that.
Because it's incoherent. Because if you're saying that everything together, so that's basically saying if you put enough rocks together, if you have 1 billion rocks, that's not enough. But if you have 1,000,000,001, suddenly they become eternal and they never move, they never changed. I mean, it's complete category error. Adding things together does not change their ability to be eternal when they're changing. Anything that changes is not eternal by definition, because it's dependent. It could not exist without that upon which it depended.
Right. So you're saying the universe, the cosmos, and so on couldn't be eternal.
Well, if you're talking about the universe as being a composite of being, no.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just trying to make sure I've got what you're saying. You're saying it couldn't be eternal because it contains non-eternal things.
Yes, because those non-eternal things don't become eternal when you add a whole bunch of them. When you Scotch tape them all together, somehow they become eternal. Can't.
Yeah, I think you are committing that fallacy, I'm afraid, because you're saying, well, this is the attributes of something within the universe, and therefore the universe itself must have those attributes. So because I'm not eternal, the universe can't be eternal.
Well, no. If you want to say the universe of all that exists is the reality of it is, I agree with you. But God is a part of the universe. Some people want to say the universe, they want to speak about everything that is changing, everything that's contingent. Then God is not a part of the universe. It depends on, you can equivocate the term, what you mean with that term. If you're talking about universe being all that exists, well, of course that includes God. But the God is not me. I'm not God.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, I must admit, I don't find it particularly convincing, because it seems to speak very much to not knowing where the universe, or what we commonly refer to as the universe, came from.
It came out of nothing.
It came out of nothing.
It has to. That which is dependent if it were not that upon which it depends, it would not exist.
Normally, when people say it came out of nothing, it's some.
Now, I don't mean that God. I don't mean that God, everything came out of existence from nothing. I'm saying contingent being came out of nothing. It has to. Logically, it has to.
I still don't necessarily. I'm not accepting that the universe is contingent. I don't. First, my main point, my main kind of hang up on this sort of argument has always been, I don't know A, where the universe came from, and B, I'm not even sure that makes sense, because I'm not sure it came from anywhere and wasn't always here, in a, if you see what I mean. And that's not to say that the universe itself or the cosmos is eternal or infinite. I'm saying that since time is a property of is a physical.
It's a measurement of change. Yeah. Would you agree with that?
Sorry?
It's a measurement of change. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, that's certainly one definition.
Okay, so
that's sort of a philosophically sort of definition.
It's also the measurement of contingent bodies moving in relation to each other. I mean, it used to be planetary, now it's atomic.
Yeah, I think that's quite a kind of an old-fashioned, rooted in philosophy sort of view of time. But because I mean, we know that things like time bends and so on. So time has, we can impact it. We can't impact it. It can be altered. It can be affected. It is a physical property, if you like. So, so I'm never comfortable with saying things like, well, the universe is infinite or it must have had a start, because I don't know that that's true. I don't know that there was a start. We could go back an infinite amount of time and never reach a start.
But it cannot be infinitely changing, because then you have only dependent existence living independently or existing.
Again, I think you're making the composition division fallacy, because there you're talking about the things within the universe when we were talking about the universe at large.
Okay, is the universe physical?
Reality at large. Sorry?
Is the universe physical? Then everything that you're talking about, is it physical?
Yeah, the universe is. Well, it depends how we're using that term. I'm kind of using it. I keep using it quite loosely, don't I?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I mean, things within the universe are physical. They exist of matter, energy, and so on. Yeah.
Okay, well, physicality is always marked by change.
Right, but that we're talking
about limitation, so it can't be eternal. It's always contingent, because it's limited by space.
What, matter?
Mm-hmm.
Is matter limited by space? Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
So it can't be self-existent. It's it's affected by space.
It exists within space.
And it's limited by space.
Yeah, but we're talking about the cosmos, the universe in general.
Okay, well then you're making a distinction between that? It's not physical then, or what?
It contains physical material matter.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know that it hasn't always existed containing physical material matter. Because I don't know that time has always existed in the same way as it exists now.
Okay, so what you're defining as the universe as a whole, whatever that is it distinct from the contingency?
Explain. Sorry.
Are you making an ontological distinction between the thing that you say is eternal and the things that you say is dependent?
I'm saying that. Trying to find the best ways to put this. I'm not claiming that the universe, or so on, the set of all things is eternal. I'm saying that we don't know that it isn't. So,
well, I'm saying we do, because logic can give us these markers.
I think it's a philosophical argument, but I think making philosophical arguments about reality and about
you can't do science without philosophy. Half the scientific method is deduction.
Well, I agree that philosophy of science, kind of methodological naturalism or whatever else, is needed to correctly do science, or to do science in a meaningful way, or whatever you want to call it. But philosophy, independently, trying to use that to reach a conclusion about reality, has led to mistakes in the past. And time would be an example, wouldn't it? Because time was something that various, Plato or whoever would talk about as a purely philosophical construct, when we later find out that actually it belongs very much purely to science. So when you're trying to use philosophy to make statements about reality, then I always kind of get very cautious, because then you start thinking, well, that's been proven wrong in the past.
Yeah, but James, whenever you make scientific statements about reality, you're always doing it provisionally, because everything is changing. We make mistakes all the time.
Oh, yeah. I mean, obviously, science is purely provisional.
I mean, we're fallible creatures. We make mistakes all over the place, but that doesn't mean that we can't learn or can't grow, and we should not, move toward it. And we can't have any level of certainty. Absolutely, we need to move forward and press on, even if we're not always able to make mistakes. And we make a mistake, say, "Oops, missed that one." Okay, let's, heliocentrism. It's a great one. The Copernican revolution.
Don't say flat. Please don't say that.
No, I'm not
it's a trigger word for me.
No, it's not. I don't even read those. It's just so boring to me. It's not even interesting to me.
So. No, it's kind of a well-known trigger for me. It kind of sets me off.
This wild eye comes in your eye when that word is spoken. What are you saying?
Pretty much. That's how it goes, yeah. It's the one time we get really rude and aggressive.
Well, listen, James, I like to keep these things about an hour, and I need to get going to go home. But I really enjoy you. I really enjoy having conversation with you. I had one of these, I think it was last night, with a guy too, and it was really pleasurable, because we actually, you listen to me, and I feel like I'm listening to you, and we're actually having an exchange of ideas. Sometimes people come on and they'll just talk because they don't feel comfortable, and so they just try to run me over and don't let me say anything. But you're not like that at all. You're like, hey, yeah, let's hear what you're saying. Let's open minded.
Yeah, I feel like you've been very interesting. I've really enjoyed talking to you. Actually, it's been great. I'd certainly like to follow up. Some of the things that you talk about in terms, obviously, your understanding of philosophy and so on goes way beyond mine. I completely appreciate that, which is why sometimes I have to say to you, hang on, is that what you're saying? But you've been very patient with me there, so that's wonderful. I'm always interested in learning why people believe the things they believe.
Fascinating.
Yeah, it is.
Unless it's flat Earth or anti-vaxxer.
In which case, I just don't want to know. One thing that unfortunately, see, I always have this thing with any sort of discussion around whether it's kind of talking about cosmological arguments or teleological arguments and so on. I always kind of feel, is that why somebody started believing in God? Because I always have this thing at the back of my head saying,
what I think they do, but it's not because of the argument. It's just we instinctively know that we're not self-existent, and we instinctively know that there's a right and wrong, and there can't be a right and wrong unless there's a right and wrong giver. No, there's more lawgiver. That's Romans 1, Romans 2. Everybody knows that instinctively, but no, most people don't go through those arcane arguments. They don't even know what they are, but instinctively they know that they are dependent in their existence, and they know that they have a creator, and they know that that they need to love one another, and that they owe thanks to the one who gives them their existence. I think everybody knows that in their own heart. That's what I
think. I will leave you to say that, and I won't challenge you on it, because that's probably that would probably run us over.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, well, and we can do it again sometime if you'd like to. But I very much enjoyed it, and it was very nice to meet you. I always enjoy meeting new British friends, and you guys are always very pleasant and very thoughtful as well. So I appreciate it, and we'll talk again.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. Very enjoyable.
All the best to you. We'll see you.
Cheers.
Bye.